I tell people all the time, if you're trying to look at everything, you will see nothing. You have to ask yourself, do I look like a target when I dress like this in the area in which I live or where I work or where I'm traveling? Anything expensive? Check yourself. Nope. Any tattoos that are exposed that could be offensive? Ask yourself those questions before you walk out. It's probably the most important thing to be aware of, and that is yourself. I got cash, I'm looking in the crowd, and I got lucky. There was a guy with an AK-47, but he was looking at me with sympathetic eyes. I went ahead and gave him the international sign of peace, right? Rubbing my fingers together, and his eyes got bigger. And he's like, yeah. And I said, okay, come in.
Was that just the way you were wired, do you think? Do you think that's just your personality, where you could just push through when, 80% of your class rings the bell and goes out?
Buds is all about teamwork. But that only applies to the people that are like standing around you at that moment in time. But as soon as one of them says, I think I'm gonna quit, then it's like, get the fuck out of here. You're not on the team anymore. See ya.
What do you mean when you think of that phrase, self-reliant?
Start with the simple stuff, Hey, if I got shot in the leg, how would I stop that bleeding if no one else is around or if 911 can't come to help me? If there is an intruder in my house, yep, I called 911, but they're 7 minutes out. And we both know a lot can happen in 15 seconds. Master the basics and you will become advanced. A lot of people want the shortcut to like some cool guy way of doing things, but there isn't. But you have to take a moment and figure out, okay, what are all the simple things I can do to prevent it? Be more preemptive, more proactive in thought. I can't stress enough, keep it simple because crisis will complicate the rest.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Clint Emerson, the former Navy SEAL, crisis management expert, and best-selling author. You spent over 2 decades conducting special operations with SEAL Team 6, considered the most highly trained elite force in the U.S. military, as well as with the National Security Agency before retiring from active service in 2015. Your expertise in counter-terrorist operations and as a surveillance expert earned you numerous awards for your leadership, including the Bronze Star Medal for heroic service to your country. As the best-selling author of the book series 100 Deadly Skills, you offer everyday civilians life-saving strategies, teaching how to survive and thrive in any circumstances. Your latest book, Escape the Wolf, details your total awareness system designed to help travelers identify and negotiate any potential high-risk situation. For 20 years, you operated by 2 strict codes. If you aren't cheating, you aren't trying, and it's only illegal if you get caught. Clint, welcome to London Real.
Hey, thanks for having me, Brian. It's good to be here.
Great to have you. I love those 2 codes, and maybe we can get into that shortly. I want to just jump in and ask you 2 questions. Is the world more dangerous, or are we just more unaware? Compared to like when you and I grew up to like say today, is it one of those things, or is it the other, or both?
I would say first, it's just the media is more dangerous. But yeah, when you have such rapid communication and the ease of information flow, the internet made all borders basically gray or non-existent. So now you've got information flowing all over the place. And it does make you start to wonder, is it really that bad out there? Or is it just the internet doing what it does best, and that is inflame anything it can possibly inflame to just create emotional reactions, clicks, views, you name it, right? So it's hard to get an accurate pulse. But if you're looking here in the States and metropolitan areas, yes, crime has gone up, violence has gone up. And it's no surprise, any of like guys that work for me on the pandemic side will tell you the virus is an indirect issue. Even just saying virus, right? The real issue is the accordion effect later as it relates to the economy, and everything else that falls in line to include supply chain issues and everything else we keep hearing about. So I'd say right now, statistically, yeah, things are probably not great, and there's always room for improvement.
Because I moved to New York City in 1993, and I remember Giuliani had just come in, and he was just cleaning house, and there was a cop on every corner, and he was going after the minor crimes, which he thought had a knock-on effect to the major crimes, and it became like, the safest it had ever been, to where it was like people didn't even recognize it anymore. And now it seems like it's going back the other way. I hear horror stories of LA. I mean, I'm from San Diego, but I hear stories in LA that I don't know if they're accurate, of people like walking into house parties and with guns and taking everybody's stuff and going into Apple stores and cleaning house. And I mean, crime is back on the rise. Is it back to the levels of like the 70s in some of those major cities?
It seems like it's definitely higher than I've ever known it to be. And, and it's hard to like connect it, right? So at least, decades ago, you could connect it to, okay, the economy's at a certain place, or it's the heat of the summer, right? Violent crime is always higher in the summers. But lately, it's like, well, what are we connecting it to? What's the foundation for it? Because, you have plenty of jobs out there. You have all of these reported positivities going on. And it's hard to connect why the violence has gone up, other than, I think people definitely are more in tune or more stressed out, or, politics. I mean, we all know that here, like, geopolitically, things are really sort of in a turmoil, and have been for a couple of years, right? So I think that's really a big piece of what's been going on.
Yeah. Let me ask you a specific question, because I'm here in London. This is the home of the former queen, now the king. This is where we drink tea and, we dress like I do. And yet, I think 2 weeks ago, right near here in the city of London, where I used to work actually as a banker, three guys were stabbed the other day in broad daylight, as these kids tried to take a mobile phone from some banker walking down the street. And the latest thing is these kids jump on these electric bikes. So again, there's like no traces. They rent them. They go fast. They can go down alleys and get away from police. They wear ski masks, and they grab these phones. And if people are either unaware or maybe stupid enough to fight back, you'll get stabbed. Stabbing's a big thing here because we don't have guns, I guess. And I mean, this, like I said, this happened, in broad daylight in kind of the Wall Street area, with, businessmen in suits are getting stabbed for their phones, and everyone's thinking, what the hell's going on? And I'm wondering, like, for anybody in London that's listening, or other major cities, what would be the first thing you say to people to try to avoid or be aware of these situations? And, is it happening, like I said, because people maybe aren't aware? And could it be prevented with a little more awareness, which is what you talk about?
Yeah, for sure. I think keeping your head on a swivel is key, and especially when you're walking down a street, because not only do you have the kids that might want to, what's called apple picking, right? Apple products are without a doubt targeted, and have been for as long as the iPhone's been out, right? Apple pickings in major cities all over the world, because it's really an expensive phone. And, not anymore, but before, you could just do a master reset on the thing and then take it to your cell phone, local mobile phone service provider. And they basically, put their SIM card in, and now you've got a phone that's yours. You didn't have to spend $1,000 on that thing. But now they're going to electronic, SIM cards. There are no more SIM cards anymore with the newer phones. So I don't know that the bad guys know that, right? It's not, you can go just switch it into your name and use it anymore. So I think that'll help once everyone knows and has a little bit of that knowledge and awareness that you can't just steal somebody's phone and then go make it yours anymore. It's going to be a whole lot more difficult. But yeah, as far as awareness, I mean, walking down the street, I always stay off your phone, right? Have that thing put away, because it's the people driving on their phones that you're going to be looking out for as a pedestrian to run you over. Especially if you're walking over bridges and any other channelized areas, you really got to have your wits about you, because that's a funnel in itself, and that's where bad guys like to attack. And that's the book concentrates solely on getting off the X. And the best way to get off the X is identifying them ahead of time and then going around them, right? So, those areas where there's high crime, or usually, the point from when you leave your residence and go to your vehicle, or when you leave work and go to your vehicle. I mean, these are all like your typical X's that are on the ground. And when I say X, that is the point in which bad guys feel they have the advantage. It's the point in which they're going to decide to attack you, because they feel like they have the element of surprise, stealth, right, and speed. And because they have those three things on their side, they'll be more successful. So if you start looking around and going, hey, where's the X? Where's the best place in my pattern of life for someone to attack me? Once you identify it, now you know the places where you have to be more aware, right? Because I tell people all the time, if you're trying to look at everything, you will see nothing, right? So you have to kind of sensitize your mind and calibrate it so that it's looking for the signs and symptoms of the very threats that exist where you live, right? And that way now I'm limiting it to just maybe these few things those signs and symptoms of certain threats. And you're going to be a lot more successful in your observation skills when you do that.
What about headphones? Keep them off?
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I love to run with music. I think everybody does. You can do adjustments now called hear through, right? So you can hear your music and you can hear the ambient outside environment. And I actually did a test with my daughter where, she had them in, and I ran up behind her, see if she could hear my feet coming, and she could. So, the technology is now caught up to those safety tips, right? Because before it's like, no, don't have anything in your ears, or at a minimum, have one out, right? Left or right ear. Make sure it's your good ear that's actually, listening for what's coming up behind you. But now the technology's gotten smarter, and you can legitimately listen to music and hear what's going on around you. But I would still factor this side of don't put anything in your ears. Let's face it. Anytime you're putting anything, an obstruction in your ear, regardless of hear through technology, you're still making yourself vulnerable.
Right. So don't put it in your ears. Don't be on your phone.
Yeah.
The problem is that most people are doing both of those things, and they're so situationally unaware. I mean, you talked about drivers. I mean, they've done tests, and drivers that texting is like worse than drunk driving. Like you're so impaired of your awareness, right?
Yeah, I think people underestimate, it's distracted driving, I mean, it is way worse than being intoxicated. Because you're literally, your mind, your eyes, all of your senses are focused into one spot in the cockpit of your vehicle. So at least when you're substance impaired, your senses are still trying to work and still trying to see what's going on out in front of you, right? But when you're looking at your phone, your hand, your thumb trying to type, all the audibles you're listening for, all of your senses are taken away, and all it takes is that split second. And obviously, a good day goes bad real quick.
Yeah, I've caught myself sometimes just catching myself at how just unaware I am, and just thinking, wow, if somebody just wanted to jack me, it would not be hard. And I have to constantly check myself. I want to ask you about a couple situations. I went down to Rio de Janeiro, I think probably in the mid 2000s, and everyone told me, like, watch yourself down there. And I was pretty good most of the time, and I use the same techniques I kind of use in London as well. When I see like a group of young kids, what I do is I usually make eye contact with them, or at least in their general direction. And I just try to show that I'm doing boom, 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 boom. And I just let them know that I'm aware they're there if I have to, or I'm just kind of aware of what's going on. I'm swiveling and I'm just trying to let everyone know that I'm looking. And I found that even though I'm not the biggest of guys, I feel like they say to themselves, you know what, I'm just going to wait for the old lady. I'm going to wait for the more clueless tourist, because I rarely had a problem. I mean, I did have a couple kids run up on me on the beach asking me for change, and I quickly realized they didn't want change. And my instinct was to run, and that was a great idea. And it worked out really well. But like, I use this technique in London and used to in New York, and it seems to work pretty good so far. Am I doing some things right, or am I doing some things wrong?
I think if it's been working, then it's right. If you haven't found yourself in a bad situation, then keep doing what you're doing, right? I mean, the reality is confidence goes a long ways, and like you already mentioned, bad guys that either plan and conduct these criminal acts for a living, or the more opportunistic predators that just see a weak person and go, oh, I bet they got $5 or whatever, right? Regardless of which kind of bad guy, confidence goes a long ways against those folks. I think the only consideration is culture, right? Is staring someone in the eyes going to, increase the odds, right? Because in some cultures, you stare someone in the eyes and they're going to get aggressive. If you avoid eye contact, then, so I think for the scenario where you've got a gang of kids and you're looking at them, letting them know, hey, I see you, and you're walking with confidence and keeping your wits about you, I think that goes a long way no matter which country you're in.
Yeah, it is a fine line for sure. And what I try to do usually is I try to just go bam, 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 because I want the other ones to see I looked at the other ones, and I want them to be, I was like bam, 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 and then I keep it going. And I just think that they're just going to be like, well, did he look at me? Did he look at them? And then it's just maybe not worth it. But I know what you mean. You might be in the one situation where you get the, what are you looking at?
Yeah.
And then,
yeah, it looks like a challenge.
Yeah. And then when you got 3 kids, you never know what the hierarchy is, what the background is. And one of them might not want to look bad. And then you might, stumble into something. You talked about awareness there. And in the book, you talk about the total awareness system, and you have various different awarenesses. You got the situational awareness, the personal awareness. You just mentioned the cultural awareness, which is really important. Third-party awareness, and then you kind of go into some other, interesting things in there. Can you break down at least some of those and explain what people need to know about that, and how you kind of qualify those?
Yeah, so the background on total awareness, which is broken into those 4 pieces that you just, listed. I was traveling abroad, working alone on a regular basis, and in between deployments, I'd come back and I'd go to the NSA or CIA and all these agencies and say, I feel like I should have an education, like on being the gray person, the person who can blend in, the person when you're at the airport, the one you don't see walk by when you're sitting there waiting. We all do people watching. And I started noticing, like, wait a minute, I'm paying attention to certain people, usually based on my own interests or ego or whatever, right? And we notice those things. Hey, I've got a Panerai watch just like that guy, or hey, those are those high heel shoes with the red bottoms on it that cost a lot of money, or we pick up on the things that it's all racked and stacked up here in our heads. And in the meantime, you've got 100 people that just walked by behind those folks you didn't even notice. And why, right? And so I was noticing this. So I had assumed, okay, somebody in all the interagencies had to have put a course together or some kind of education to teach you how to blend in and be like that 100 people that just walked by that I never noticed. And I went knocking on a bunch of doors, and at that time there was nothing. And so then I started compiling my notes. My notes became a 3-ring binder, and then the 3-ring binder became Escape the Wolf, the book. And so through my travels, I was like, there's all this concentration on the situational awareness, but there's actually more to it. And so that's what I call total awareness, where you start with personal awareness. And this is projection and demeanor management, right? Like how you're dressed right there, how you project yourself in your Instagram videos, and how you show up to do this interview. You have a style, you have a thing that's yours, and it sets you apart from everybody else, right? And that's because on personal awareness and projection demeanor, it's our ego that dresses us in the morning because we do want to stand out. We want to be separate from everybody else. It's normal, especially here in America, right? So what you have to do when you're doing that, though, is go, all right, you have to ask yourself, do I look like a target when I dress like this in the area in which I live or where I work or where I'm traveling, right? So that goes back to anything expensive. Check yourself. Nope. Any tattoos that are exposed that could be offensive, like my big American flag, right? You cover them up. Is there any big logos, name brands, bright colors, right? So you got to just ask yourself those questions before you walk out. It's probably the most important thing to be aware of, and that is yourself, right? Because it's those third parties, right? So third party awareness is one of the pieces of total awareness that are going to observe it. That could be criminals, it could be law enforcement, foreign intel services, or what I like to always use because of the nature of the work I was doing. It's the grandma in the window that sits there at 3 p.m. every day with her cafe and chocolate and likes to watch everybody on the streets. And she knows everyone walking by on those streets. She knows what's normal and what isn't. And she's going to be the one to call her grandchild and say, hey, there's a stranger walking through our neighborhood right now. And he happens to be Al Qaeda, right? The grandson. Right. So for me, third party awareness was the most important aspect. And so how can I control it? How do I control people I don't even know? It starts with personal awareness, then cultural awareness, right? I can control what I wear. Now I can control how much education I get about the area I'm going, the do's and don'ts, the social protocols and norms, the mannerisms, all of that, right? So now I'm doing what they're doing and I'm showing respect and I'm building allies, right? Because I can tell you right now, you show respect in that culture and you get a business card or two, those business cards will get you out of trouble faster than the State Department every single time, because the State Department ain't going to move on your behalf anytime soon, right? So you're building alliances and you're building that respect and mutual respect with the people you encounter each day just through cultural awareness. And that's why it's important we're not the ugly Americans anymore. And then finally, you have situational awareness, which really is, I try to keep it as simple as possible. It's paying attention to your environment, but knowing that, okay, there's a 3-meter bubble we live in. And I like to compare it to a boat. If I'm standing in a boat and the boat's in the middle of a swamp, right? And you've got alligators in your boat, you got alligators just outside the boat, and then you got the alligators that are inbound. So how you observe and how you deal with things is basically like what can touch me and what's in arm's reach is first, then just outside arm's reach, and then beyond that, right? And if you scan your environment and look at things that way, you're taking a little bit more control, right? And so by doing personal awareness, cultural awareness, and keeping your head on a swivel, now you're taking control of that third party piece, which if you don't observe the other three, then you're just kind of taking chances when you walk out the door.
I like the alligator. So you first make sure there's none in your boat. That's the 3-meter piece, or that's the 1-meter piece? And then it's like if they're outside the boat, still something to be worried about. And then again, if they're inbound, it's still something to think about. Like you're in a potentially dangerous neighborhood where anything could happen, but at least it's not immediate.
Exactly. Yeah. And then the other variable here is the element of surprise, right? We can have our seatbelt on, a full tank of gas, paying attention, following all the traffic safety laws, and still get T-boned in the intersection by an idiot, right? So the element of surprise is the piece that, you're definitely always trying to counter and look for and observe when you're, trying to be more aware.
It's really interesting, Clint. You said, like you're taking me for example, and yeah, I mean, I'm dressed to get attention, and like you said, a lot of people are. And you mentioned my Instagram. I was just in Dubai and I was hanging out with a bunch of crypto influencers, and one of them's from Sweden. He's a big influencer, worth over 100 million probably. And he's like, I don't go back anymore because of the crime. And I was like, what do you mean the crime? And he's like, people came and took my stuff in 3 different occasions. And he found out it was probably because he posted where he was going on Instagram. So,
Yeah.
right? And a couple guys had said that. And so, again, it's almost like a digital piece of that personal awareness where you're almost even letting people know beforehand that you're getting there. And it literally, there were dudes in Stockholm, they were waiting for him. They saw his post, so they watched a hashtag. They knew he was going to be there. He drives a Bugatti. They're thinking, you know what, this is going to be a good score. And it happened like repeated times to where he was like, all right, this is now a digital personal awareness as well. Have you heard of that before?
No, you nailed it. And I mentioned in the book, like every piece of total awareness applies to the cyber world, right? So personal awareness, situational awareness, all of it, right? Third party, right? You've got trolls watching, waiting to just make a dumb comment, and then you've got criminals watching and waiting because you're posting things real time. In the book, I also discussed, give yourself, never post real time. In fact, give yourself a 72 window or beyond. Put that 72 hour delay in your social media calendar, right? So that you're always 3 days ahead of where you were the day you're posting, right? Yeah. So it's not rocket science. It's pretty easy. It's just people get excited and they want to share what they're doing right now, or they're at a convention and everybody else is sharing that they're at the convention. But it's probably just best to wait, right? And then turn off all your location settings and, all the stuff you hear about.
Yeah, I ran to be mayor of London in 21, and I was trying not to, post any pictures where I lived, and then we ended up getting some death threats, and it's just like, you're like, man, I mean, you really have to be smart and careful. And again, even if it wasn't a legit threat, it can do just as much damage, right, to the family and the psychology and the team, whether it is or it isn't. So it's again, another just a good example of being aware of that maybe third-party awareness, but now digitally as well,
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I think it's probably more important because we're so leashed to technology, right? I mean, it's a constant, necessary evil now. There was a time, right, as technology started to emerge, you'd be like, I'm not using that crap. But I mean, now you have, especially social media, right? It was just individuals on there. And then Fortune 500 started opening up accounts. And then you're like, holy crap, now if you don't have an account, you're the weirdo, right? So, yeah.
I must say, I was surprised that there would be kind of, criminals that would follow one of these crypto guys and when he was coming to town to go specifically to jack him, I was like, wow. But, probably makes sense now that I think about it. You used an acronym THREAT in your book as well, and I was wondering if you could tell us what it talks about, because I guess you're trying to look at some of the different risk assessments like health and environmental and raid and terror threats. But yeah, I mean, why do you use that acronym and how is it helpful?
Yeah, so once again translating a military career and how can you give civilians kind of sort of the same skills. The threat acronym is a way of creating your own threat intelligence report before you go do anything, especially traveling abroad or here in the States. If you're just going from Dallas to New York, it's a good idea to do it, right? One, it's sensitizing you to anything you could potentially face when you get there. Getting you educated, and also when you actually take 10 minutes, that's all it takes, right? You write threat, THREAT, vertically on a piece of paper, and then you're going to go Google technical threats, New York, right? And technical threats is, all your cyber stuff, audio, video tracking. And if you hit, news, do a quick run. Like, what's some of the tech threats that have been going on, or tech crimes? And then you can hit scholarly stuff, the academia side, right? And get the real fact-filled reports, if there are any, on that particular threat, particular city, right? So THREAT. So technical threats, health threats. R is raids, robbery, ransom, which are your most violent crimes. And then you have environmental threats. So that's all your natural disaster. Like here in Dallas, we're about to have, tornadoes all day. And then A, agencies working against you. So that was a big concern for me, and should be for anybody who has any kind of intellectual property on their devices, or they travel for a big company. And then, of course, the last T, the threat that's never going away, terrorism, right? We don't hear much about it right now, but it always goes full circle. So you want to always make sure you're staying in the loop on it. But once again, you're just creating a nice little threat report for yourself. You spend 10 minutes Googling each of those threats for the place you're going, and you'll be better for it, right? It'll lead to more questions, which will lead to more answers. Now you're a whole lot more prepared. And like I was talking about at the beginning, you can't look at everything, right? You'll just end up blind. So by doing that threat report, you're sensitizing, okay, now I know what to look for. Now I know what to do. You're reading news, you're reading scholar reports that kind of give you the answers ahead of time. And, then you'll have a much more confident, safer trip. And that's really the goal, is give yourself that confidence so that you're not, over sensitized by being in a new environment, right? We all end up that way. You go to a new country, you're not paying attention to anything. You're just trying to figure out what the hell's going on and taking in all the new noises, new languages, new everything, right? So I'm trying to decrease that a little bit by getting educated before you go.
It's funny. I think I did a poor man's version of threat when I remember I was here in London, and it was like '05, and I decided to take a trip to Beirut. I thought that would be kind of cool. And I remember asking my travel agent, I'm like, is it safe to go to Beirut? And I guess that was the last T, terrorist. And he came right back at me and he said, is it safe to be in London? It's like, and he had a good point. I mean, we just had, a couple years after that, we had bombings in the subway. Then we had guys driving down vehicles down London Bridge, stabbing people, fake explosive vests. And it's funny because a lot of people used to think terrorism was abroad. And then you got these lone wolf attacks, Oklahoma City bombings. And I mean, you have to assess it even domestically, that last T, right?
Yeah. I try to shed a little bit of reality on folks, right? Number one, general statement. What used to be the wrong place at the wrong time is now any place, anytime. So the stereotype of the Middle East, or down in South America with crime and kidnappings and this and that, are there case studies? Were there times when it was really bad? Yes. But these days, I mean, anything goes anywhere you're at, and you have to keep that in mind. And as it relates to like the terror piece, I mean, how do we define terror anymore, right? Mass shootings is terrorism, right? And they're happening every day here in the United States.
Yeah.
If anyone ever goes and looks up like immunizations required for certain countries, you think, oh, countries in Africa, third world, right? I'm probably going to need every shot under the sun to go there. And that's true, because it's definitely, there's viruses there that don't exist here. But when you compare if you look at the list of diseases in other countries and then compare it to the list of diseases in the United States or in first world countries, I think people would be shocked that like the first world countries have a far bigger list. And so we end up kind of thinking, oh no, you go over there, you're going to get sick, and this is going to happen, that's going to happen. But the reality is, here in our own homes, we're surrounded by plenty of freaking diseases that we don't even care about. We walk out the door each day. So yeah, the stereotype stuff is, I think, just that. And, anything can happen anywhere these days.
Yeah. You mentioned you did a test with your daughter where you kind of, snuck up behind her and to see if the headphones worked or not. And I had Tim Kennedy on the show like a year ago, Green Beret and MMA fighter, and He's got his company,
Yeah.
Sheepdog Response. I'm sure you guys know of each other. And he kidnapped his daughter, I think, like a year ago. Him and three of his buddies like grabbed her and threw her in her van, and it was to kind of teach her a lesson about her own situational awareness. And he got a little flack for it, but that's Tim. I mean, Tim would do this anyways. But I think like a year later, he was just like, look, she got some valuable lessons that actually might save her life one day. How do you feel about doing something like that to someone or a loved one to just really teach them about awareness?
No, I think it's great because, well, for me, I would personally, hey, let's do some training first, and then let's test it, right? Under stress. I think there's no better way to learn, right? I mean, you go through a little bit of training and then make sure you take that training and apply it to a stressful, contained scenario, and then put all of that training to work and ensure that you know what you're doing, right? And make sure that you absorbed all of the education that you need in order to survive. So yeah, does my daughter, she knows how to get out of duct tape, zip ties, she carries, different tools that, can protect her. She is probably better on a handgun than, most men I know. So yeah, I think, educating your family and getting skills, obviously that's my number one job since I've been out, is like a skills provider. And so I feel like everyone should be educating themselves and educating their family through and through. I mean, there's plenty out there to learn, and it's fun, right? If you make it a family endeavor, it's a great way to hang out, rather than just, binging on some television show.
Yeah, I was watching some of your videos, and you got some great ones online, so people should check them out. But there was one where you were, talking about some basics, and I wanted to ask you, if you had to tell someone to study maybe 3 basic things that you teach, what would they be? And I saw you talking about, concealing razor blades on yourself, the handcuff keys, and then like learning how to get out of a trunk, and some other things. What do you think are just like, if somebody wanted to spend an hour this weekend, and it might be the only hour they ever spend on this stuff, what do you think are just some really good return on investment type stuff to do with this type of personal security?
Yeah, I think, restraint defeat is definitely up on the list, right? I mean, being able to escape a bad situation is utmost important, especially if restraints are involved. So duct tape obviously is the number one restraint in the world because it's cheap, it's readily available. Second to that is zip ties. Third is handcuffs. The handcuffs are the Smith & Wesson Peerless, which are the most common ones around the globe. So I think, being familiar with the different kinds of restraints out there and then practice getting out of them is a great hour spent. I mean, it wouldn't take much longer, right? I mean, getting out of duct tape is the same techniques as you're going to get out of zip ties. And then handcuffs is basically shimming them. And, and if you've got a soft drink can or a beer can, you can literally use your kitchen scissors and cut shims. And now you've got a shim that'll basically go in between the ratchet teeth and the ratchet mechanism itself, right? And it disconnects the two from one another and allows the handcuffs to come free. That's if they're not double locked, right? Cops are always going to double lock their handcuffs. Criminals don't take the time to do it. So, but yeah, I mean, that's a great one. It's sexy. It's fun. Everybody can do it kind of thing. Outside of that, really, working on your awareness skills. You can play what we call keep in mind or Kim's games, where you can, go out in your front yard and place really, really tiny objects that are barely visible, and then have a family member come out and try and see all of them. See how many they can identify in 30 seconds, right? You get to take a snapshot with your eyes and your mind, and then immediately head down and write all the things you saw. And doing those observation games and skills are great because then when you go to a restaurant or you go to an airport or you're at a big sporting event or something, now you're all of a sudden pulling out the details in a crowd. So there's a lot of cool stuff that, we talk about in the book that you can certainly apply and spend an hour on, and it'll be a great hour, right? That'll serve you well, outside your home.
I got 2 boys and they're 5 and 6 years old. What do you, what would you do with those age groups, to start introducing some of these ideas?
Well, at that age, it's always good to turn things into games, right? So I think, your home is your safe site. That's your safe place, and kids want to feel safe there. But I also think it's important to go, hey, you hear a noise at night. What are we going to do? How are we going to react? How are you going to rally up together and then make your way to dad? And then do it, right? Have fun with it. Different ways of communicating, right? Whether it's, flashlights, letting you know where you are, it's just a couple of, flashes of the light. You don't want to leave a flashlight completely on, especially if, there's an intruder situation. It gives up your location and all that stuff. But I think, in the middle of the night can blueprint better than anyone else your location, right? So keep it black and move around the house, and do it. See if you can do it as quietly as possible. And also talk about exit strategies, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's a fire, a bad guy, whatever it is, hey, how am I getting out of my bedroom? How am I getting out of the living room? How am I getting out of the kitchen? So I think that's for that age group, whether boys or girls, like doing that kind of stuff and making it fun. Once again, it's going to give you peace of mind too. Okay, now my kids know what to do, right?
Yeah.
I still worry to this day sending my daughter off to college. Like, did I really prepare her the best I could? Is there something I forgot that could potentially happen to her, and I'll be hating myself later that, oh my God, I can't even believe I didn't talk about that with her, right?
Yeah.
So give yourself a peace of mind, parents, and have fun with your kids and do these exit strategies and, fun games, if you will, that will allow them to, escape the wolf.
Yeah. I'm going to do that. And definitely with some basics as far as fire escapes, what happens if this happens, and then, people knocking on the door. I'm going to be running through that, I think, this weekend. You've got something called there's something called an OODA loop, which I think stands for observation, orientation, decision, action. And then I read some story about you that I thought was really interesting, and I don't know if it involves one of these loops, but I think you had been dropped into some unnamed country and had gotten some basics from the embassy, like a wad of cash, a mobile phone, and a handgun. And you're in a car and you find yourself in a situation with a lot of people angry surrounding your car, and you had to make some very important decisions, not obvious decisions, in order to get out of there alive. I was wondering if you could just talk about that and the decisions you make, because it's almost like a crazy puzzle, because you could have easily made some wrong decisions that would have felt right, that probably would have gotten you killed.
Yeah, no, it was probably one of the more, as a SEAL, you're doing a lot of risky, crazy stuff, but you're trained for it. You rehearse it. You're doing it all the time. You're very confident with those skills, and then you go do it. Everything was 100% out of my control, and it was Arab Spring, so there wasn't a major city in the Middle East that didn't have riots and social unrest going on. Obviously, it made national news for like every day for a month or months, and I was working in one of those countries. And just like you said, you land, you go check in with the embassy. They give you whatever you need, some creds and, money and a phone and your gun. And that's just kind of to get you started. So you've got local cash and whatever else. Get in the vehicle and, a lot of
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.